In this parsha we have probably one of the more mysterious stories in all of Chumash, honestly. A few psukim that are like, without Tarsh Bal Peh, just is completely a closed book. So the pasuk says we know that Yaakov Avinu, the whole parsha, he's preparing himself to have this confrontation, the showdown with Esav. And he prepares himself, he sends gifts, he prepares for war even, he davens to Hashem. And so the pasuk says he's traveling with his family, and there's this passage, this river Yabok, that he passes his family over. And for whatever reason, again, it doesn't really explain why in the Chumash, Yaakov Avinu finds himself alone on the other side of this passageway, completely alone. And it says in pasuk, "Vayavik ish imay adolai sashachar," that this person emerges out of nowhere and starts wrestling with Yaakov Avinu, and they're wrestling until the morning. And it says in pasuk that eventually Yaakov Avinu he's victorious in this wrestling match. He wins, but he is injured in the thigh. And the pasuk continues that the morning the sun comes up and he's miraculously healed. And this whole conversation between this Yaakov Avinu and this person, and he asks him, "What's your name?" And the person says, "What are you asking my name for?" And Yaakov Avinu requests a bracha. And so the person says, "Okay, what is your name?" And he says, "My name is Yaakov." So the person says, "Vayomer lo Yaakov, Yomer od Shemcha." Your name should no longer be Yaakov, Ki im Yisrael. Your name is Yisrael. Why? Ki sarisa emulakim v'manoshim v'ducha, because you've wrestled with a divine being and with human beings, and you were successful. In other words, and Chazal explained that this was not a human being, right? This is not a regular person. This was the Malach of Esav, the ministering angel of Esav. And so before his confrontation with the physical Esav, so he first has to have a confrontation with Esav's spiritual or divine counterpart, exactly. And so because Yaakov Avinu was able to be successful in that wrestling match with the Malach of Esav, so because of that, he's given the name Yisrael. Ki sarisam lakim v'noshim v'tucha. All right, so here's the question, and I'm going to first ask that. Which the name Yisrael, which Yaakov Avinu is being given, l'chayra, it would make sense that the name that he would be given would be corresponding to the fact that he was victorious in his wrestling match. The word Yisrael, the Malach explains, is ki sarisa, because you've wrestled, you've dealt with it. So the question is that the name Yisrael doesn't mean that he won. The name Yisrael just means that he's wrestling. Why would that be the name given to him? It should be like he should have, his name should be like Matzliach, or something. But Tuchal, his name should be, the Tuchal should be, then he was successful. What's Ki Sarisa, the fact that he wrestled, that's the name that's given to him. All right, so this is a very, very important principle that we're gonna learn today for the next few minutes, which is as follows. It's, there are a couple, there's a word that we throw around a lot, like tzaddik. I'm saying, a guy, I need to blow my nose, pass me a tissue. The guy passed me a tissue. Oh, you're such a tzaddik, right? Tzaddik. So that's a word that we just throw around to anyone that does nice things or does good things. We call him a tzaddik, But what really is a tzaddik? Like in the true definition of the word, like the technical term tzaddik versus I guess you can call the other categories Beini, like a regular Joe Schmo. Like what's really the difference between a person that is in the category of tzaddik versus a person that's not in the category of tzaddik? So there's a famous teaching from the Tanya. And initially when you first hear this, it's a little bit shocking. But this is what the Tanya says, and he's not the only one to say this, he's not the first one to say it, but this is what the Tanya writes. Tanya explains that the real definition of a tzaddik is not just a person that does Torah mitzvahs. He says you could have a Jew who never sins in their life, who did everything perfect in their life, never will sin, knows all of Torah, does every mitzvah that comes their way, and they're not called a tzaddik. What's the definition of a tzaddik? A tzaddik, said the Baal Tanya, is someone who, whether obviously they have to put in work to earn this, but the definition of a tzaddik, says the Baal Tanya, is someone who simply does not have a Yetzer Hara, who simply no longer has a struggle with a temptation, with some part of them that doesn't want to do the mitzvah, that doesn't want to learn, that doesn't want to do the act of kindness. There's no struggle. So in other words, you could have another person who also learns Torah, also does mitzvahs, these two people do exactly the same thing. They have the same schedule, the same mitzvahs, they know the same amount of Torah, and so on. One's a tzaddik and one's not. Why? Because one person, he doesn't have the struggle anymore. The Rabbanu Shalom created his neshama in such a way where it has the capacity and it has the quality of simply not having a struggle. It just doesn't have the Yetzer Hara. Whereas the other person, again, does the same thing, but everything he does is through wrestling with a part of him that doesn't want to do it. So said the Baal Tanya, the definition of a tzaddik is not, again, it's not a matter of like how many mitzvahs that you have done, or it's a matter of, is there a struggle? Are you wrestling with anyone while you're doing it? Is there anyone you're wrestling with? Said the Baal Tanya, if as long as there's someone that you're wrestling with, in order to, while you're doing Torah and mitzvahs, that means you're in the category of what's called a beini. The Gemara says a beini literally means someone in between. A beini, the Gemara explains, is zev is ashaftan, someone who has two voices. There's a voice, the positive voice inside the head that says, give the tzedakah, and the voice inside the head that says, you know what, you worked very hard, that guy should work harder, it's not your problem. And the beini is someone that has these two voices, and it could be that he makes every single time the right choice. But ultimately, there's something that he's struggling with. As long as there's a struggle, that's called beini. A tzaddik is, all there is one voice. All there is one voice. Now, says the Baal Tanya further. Baal Tanya says, not every neshama that the Rebbeinu Shalom made is capable of being that tzaddik. The Gemara says, for example, that the Rebbeinu Shalom, when he created the world, he created X amount of tzaddikim, a certain amount of tzaddikim, and because he saw that there's very few of them, he scattered them throughout the generations. There's such a thing like 36 tzaddikim, like Lamavav tzaddikim in every generation. Says the Baal Tanya, of course, if a person is given, there are certain neshamas, there's a category of neshama which is called a tzaddik, and when a person has that neshama, it means that they could eventually get to the point of where they no longer have the struggle, but not everyone is capable of that. Not everyone is given that possibility of ever leaving the struggle. It means for the vast majority of neshamas, in other words, says about time, this is a little bit harsh, he says for the vast majority of people, their neshamas are predestined to always be in the battlefield. For the vast majority of people, we don't have the capability of ever disengaging from that battle. We're always going to have that inner voice. Only very few people are given that potential of being a tzaddik, a true tzaddik, which is no longer a struggle, and everything just comes with one voice, with one single voice telling them the right thing to do. That's about time. Okay? The question that this raises is the following. Why in the world would God do that? Why in the world would the Rebbeinu Shalom create neshamas that don't have the ability to ever get out of the wrestling match? None of us have the issue necessarily. We don't have the issue with the concept of there being neshamas that are able to get out of the wrestling match. Of being a tzaddik, that's fine. The question is the other side. Why? What does the Rebbeinu Shalom gain from creating neshamas that are naturally beinim, that are just that's who they are, always with a struggle? What's accomplished with that? Okay, so to answer that question, so let me share with you the following idea. We find this in the writings of Rav Kook. Rav Yussie Zakutinsky, a Kohen Kook, was a great, Mekubalim, philosophers, Jewish leaders, you name it, in the early 1900s. So he raises the following observation. And it's really this observation which is going to explain to us what exactly the Rebbeinu Shalom gains with these neshamas that are called beinim, these people that are always in the fight, that are always in the struggle. He says like this, he says if you think about it, there was, going back in our people's history, there was one big Yetzer Hara that the Jewish people really struggled with for the longest time, mamish from the beginning, for the very longest time. And then at some point, we were able to overcome it. What was that Yetzer Hara? Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah, exactly. So from the beginning of our people's history, really from the beginning of time, there was always this big monster around the corner, around every corner, called Avodah Zarah. And Klal Yisrael struggled with it during the times of Har Sinai, all the way till the end of the first Beis HaMikdash. It was always a struggle. All of a sudden, Rav Kook points out, all of a sudden at the end, after the first Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, and we move into the era of the second Beis HaMikdash, boom, all of a sudden, there's no more Avodah Zarah in the world. I mean, there is Avodah Zarah, but there's no temptation. We got our handle on it. You know what I'm saying? We figured it out. We were able to manage it properly. We weren't overwhelmed by it. What's the change? So he said like this. Rav Kook said, he gave a mashal. Let's say you have a lawn, right? You have a lawn, and let's say there's a problem with weeds in your lawn. Okay, so one way to go about dealing with the weed problem in your lawn is to take a weed whacker, you know what I'm saying, or a lawnmower, that type of thing, and just go and cut the weeds down. And so your guy does that. He mows all the weeds in his front lawn, and he looks back and he's like, Gavaldik, my lawn doesn't have any weeds anymore. What's going to happen? Next week they're going to come back, right? Why? Because all you were thinking about was the big picture. All you're thinking about is like the big look of my lawn, and I want to get the weeds out of it. The problem is that in order to get rid of weeds, you got to get to the root. You got to get to the root. You have to be able to look in a more specific way to get to every little nook and cranny of your lawn and to seek and destroy the very, very roots of every single weed. When you're able to do that, then you could sit back and say, no more weeds. So Kook said like this. He said there is such a thing, there are certain neshamas, there are certain time periods in Jewish history, I guess you can say, that the overall method, the overall approach of the Jewish people at that time is big picture stuff. Big picture stuff, holistic. So the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, that was the time of prophecy. What's Nevuah? Nevuah is big picture, God talking to me. Think about it. When the Nevi'im, when we have, Musar Shmuz, you know what I mean, from the Nevi'im, what are they talking about? They're talking about making sure that you say Zman Kriya Shema on time. No, they're not talking about that. They're talking about big picture stuff. They're talking about, justice and morality and, big ideas. What's amazing about big ideas is that it's inspiring, it's gewaldic, it's amazing, but you're not getting the roots of the weeds. You follow? You're still allowing, you're getting rid of the Yetzer Hara in the big picture, but you're not getting to the very, very nooks and crannies where the Yetzer Hara might still be lurking. For example, there's a story that Chazal tell us. It's an actual story, but it's also it's a metaphor at the same time. There was one of the Jewish kings. His name is Yoshio. Yoshio was a big tzaddik, and Yoshio did a lot in his time during the times of the first temple to get rid of Avodah Zarah, and so much so that he sent messengers in every single. He had policemen and so on, going through mamish house to house and getting rid of idols. But says the Gemara, but he wasn't successful. Why? Because people, what they used to do is they used to have idols hiding behind the door. So when the cops would open the door would swing open, and the idol would just be behind there. So they looked everywhere. They didn't think of closing the door behind them and looking over there. That's the story. So it's an actual story. That's what happened. But it's also a metaphor. Because that entire time period, Yoshio HaMelech, who was living during the times of Nevuah, the approach of trying to handle Yetzer Hara was like big ideas, like a big party and like a big inspirational type of things, which is very, very nice, and you could get rid of a lot of Avodah Zarah. You could get rid of the weeds on top of the surface, but you're not getting to the root. How do you get rid of the roots? That's where you need Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's where you need the oral Torah. That's where you need Chachamim in the second Beis Hamikdash, who now tell you, it was all very nice, the big speeches of the Nevi'im, justice and morality, it's all nice. It's all very, very nice, but let me teach you something. Wash your hands 3 times like this before you eat bread. You know what I'm saying? And don't touch a pen on Shabbos because you might lead to right. The nitty-gritty details. What's beautiful about the details of Torah is that although it's not as inspirational and as emotionally exuberating as the big picture stuff, but it gives the Jewish soul the ability to get into the nooks and crannies of itself and seek and destroy the roots of the weeds. And so Avodah Zarah, which was a huge Yetzer Hara, as much as there was like this, the weed whacking of the first Beis Hamikdash with Nevuah, it kept on coming back. Because Judaism wasn't detail-oriented enough to focus in on the nooks and crannies of our souls, the nooks and crannies of our lives, to really guide us in those minutiae, even in the small details of life, to make sure that we get rid of all the little places of life that might be a breeding ground for negativity. And for that, you have to be engaged in the details. This is, by the way, the Yontif of Chanukah in a certain sense. The entire Yontif of Chanukah is a celebration of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, versus the written Torah. Because Chanukah was at a time of the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, where there was a transition at that time between the the time period of Nevuah, which is the written Torah, and the time period of Chachamim, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh. And Chanukah comes to celebrate the new era, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh. What's to celebrate about Torah Sheba'al Peh? The celebration of Torah Sheba'al Peh is that now we are given a Yiddishkeit that has details to it. Now we're given a Yiddishkeit where it's not just about inspiration and big ideas. It's about big ideas that are able to have a fine-tooth needle comb to them. You know what I'm saying? That we're able to take these big ideas and apply them to the details of our lives. So before Torah Sheba'al Peh comes along, there are big ideas, God and faith and morality and justice. But practically speaking, what does that mean? And it's very, very hard to take those big ideas and apply them to a particular situation in life. And so a person could look at themselves in the mirror and say, I'm a moral person, I'm a just person, and I care about God, and I believe. And that's all, it's 100% true. And because of their big feelings and they're oriented towards big ideas, they're taking a weed whacker, and they could get rid of most of the idols, so to speak, in their homes. But at the end of the day, there's going to be some nook and cranny in their lives. There's going to be some situation that comes up that's still, that's still a petri dish for some negative issue to emerge from, because with all the big vision, they can't fit into that small corner. Comes Tarsh Balpeh and says, embrace the big vision that you have from the first temple, but now take that vision, and I'm giving you the tools, says Tarsh Balpeh, to take that vision and to focus it in on small details. And when you focus it in on the small details of life, now you're able to truly eradicate and perfect those nooks and crannies of life. The Ribono Shel Olam's purpose in creation was to give us the mission statement of making this world a place where He's comfortable to live in. In order for that to happen, we have to work in this world on two levels. We have to create a world in which, generally speaking, God's comfortable in, but then we have to take that general approach, right, and that general house cleaning, and apply it to the small little nooks and crannies. It's no different than, let's say you have a room that's like completely filthy. It's filthy, it has to be mopped, you know what I'm saying? But it's also like a mess. So what do you have to do? You can't go in initially with a toothbrush, you know what I mean, start scrubbing every tile when the whole room is just piles of boxes and chaos. But you can't just think that you're just going to move out all the boxes and whatnot and leave a filthy floor. You got to do two. There has to be the holistic, big picture approach of like, we have to just clear out the junk over here. And when you're clearing out the junk, you're not thinking too much about this particular piece and that, but just clear it all out. But then once everything is clear, the objective has not finished yet. Now the detailed cleaning begins. And so this is what the Ribono Shel Olam wants. The Ribono Shel Olam created two types of neshamas. There are neshamas that they're more oriented. Their mission in life is the big picture, big cleaning. Just get the boxes out of here. That's called a tzaddik. And when those neshamas of tzaddikim that are predisposed to just weed whacking the lawn. So those neshamas, when they take care of the lawn, their job is done. They don't have to be always within the struggle because, okay, you got rid of the boxes. What is the role of the Beini? What's the Mila? What does God want of the other types of category of Jews, most of us, that are always in the struggle? The answer is our job, for the most part, is going through life with a fine-tooth comb, of always being confronted with another scenario, with another corner of the room that needs more cleaning. See, the big picture, it's like the Lubavitch Rebbe used to say this, you know? The other tzaddikim before him also said this, that like, where are we holding with, like, before Mashiach? He said, at this point, Mashiach's dressed, we're just like polishing the buttons. You know what I'm saying? That's where we are. But polishing the buttons, it's tedious. It's tedious because every single nook and cranny of that button has to be polished. You know what I'm saying? So there are certain neshamas that they're oriented towards cleaning the room in a bigger picture, in a bigger sense. And once that room is clean, they're fine. They don't have to struggle anymore. That's not their job. But then there's other neshamas that their job sort of never ends, because they're not accomplishing something, but they're always being moved from one little corner to another little corner for the purposes of cleaning this corner and then that corner, and not just weed whacking, but getting to the root of the weeds. When Yaakov Avinu was struggling with the Malach Esav says to him, I'm giving you an unbelievable name. I'm renaming you. And this new name that I'm going to give you is going to encompass, it's going to encapsulate what's so amazing about you. What was the name? That you wrestle. Not that you succeed, but that you wrestle. Because what the Malach Esav is telling Yaakov Avinu is that you want to know the real secret to your victory over me? The real secret to your victory over me is not just weed whacking the lawn and taking a step back and say, Gevaldik, we did it. Your success over me, says the Malach Esav, is your willingness to get into the nooks and crannies of things, of struggling with this, and then struggling with that, wrestling with this, and wrestling with that, always being in that wrestling match, moving from nitty-gritty detail to nitty-gritty detail, and never sitting back and saying, well, I basically just finished it, Avodah Zarah is out of the way. No, it's never disengaging and recognizing that although I moved the Avodah Zarah out of the house, but there's still a possibility of the Avodah Zarah growing from behind the door. and engaging that moment and engaging that detail. That's what Hanukkah is. The yontiv of Hanukkah, the beauty of Hanukkah, is the Jewish people's ability to take those big ideas and those big moments of inspiration and those, the spiritual enlightenment of prophecy and apply it to the details of life. That's the beauty of Yiddishkeit. That's what Yiddishkeit's about. Let me share with you a quick ma'aseh, mamish, very, very quick. Happens to be, it's not the most pleasant of stories, so I apologize. You know what I mean? If there's a little bit of a downer, but it's an important ma'aseh. The ma'aseh goes that a person once, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and the sons are of, not the son, the Abderov, I'm sorry, Rav Mishu Heschel Vav, the Abderov, 3 in the morning, gets a knock on his door, like a violent knock. So he comes, opens the door, and it's this a guy standing by the door, a Jewish guy standing by the door. He's mamish like, completely looks exhausted, like ice bench, And he says, Rabbi, I'm sorry to bother you like so late at night. My wife is in the middle of labor right now, and she's been in labor for like 48 hours. It's mamish crazy. The doctors don't know what to do. I need a bracha. So the Rebbe puts his head down. After a few minutes, he picks his head up and he said, Mazel Tov, the baby's born. You have a healthy boy. Enjoy. Fine, that's what he does. He goes home. Kachav, the baby was born. It's miraculous. So after a couple of days of dealing with his wife and the baby, he goes back to the Abderov and he wants to just thank him. Like at the time, he was like, he couldn't think, so he didn't even say thank you. You know what I'm saying? So he goes back. And so he tells the Gabi what happened. The Gabi is like, okay, I'll let you go in to go say, thank you to the Rebbe, but you have to ask the Rebbe what was he doing for those few minutes? You have to get the end of the story. You know what I'm saying? So he goes in and he says, Rebbe, thank you so much for the bracha and everyone's doing well, but I have to ask, what's pshat? Like what was going on? So Rebbe said like this. He said, the truth is, your son has a very big neshama. He's a very big neshama. And neshama, it's such a big neshama, it didn't want to come down to the world. It didn't want to come to this place, So the only way I could convince him to come down is if I promised the neshama that its portion in Avodas Hashem would be mamish, unbelievably chashuv. And then after hearing that promise, then the neshama said, fine, then I'm asking. And he came down, that's what happened. So the Chassidim hear the story, and so then now they keep tabs on this kid, right? They want to okay, what's going to be with him, So it's a little bit of a sad story. What happens is a few years later, the mother passes away, the father passes away, the kid's orphaned. And what happened, unfortunately, at that time in Tsarist Russia, especially when kids that didn't have much people taking care of them, he was drafted into the Russian army. And it was mamash geferlich to be at that time. If you were in the Russian army, not only physically was a torture, spiritually they would do everything you can to stop from keeping Shabbos and kashrus. It was like mamash terrible. And for years, all this kid was doing was just struggling for the most basic things, to be able to wear a yarmulke, to maybe have a Shabbos here, to eat a piece of kosher food there. Mamish struggling, always being faced with anti-Semites and Loleno and tsaris from his commanding officers and from the guys around him, just making fun of him, just constantly like that. Until finally, eventually after a bunch of years working in the army, unfortunately, he was actually killed in battle. So after all these terrible life, so they go back to the Abderov and they say, Rebbe, this is the big neshama with the big avodah. Like, what is it? So Abderov said, do you have any idea how chashuv it is when a Jew is put in a situation where they're up against it and that they struggle just to put on a yarmulke? And the person struggles, mamash puts in all sorts of push and effort in order to eat a piece of kosher food. Chashuv that is in Shemayim. When I promised that neshama that its portion in Avodas Hashem would be unbelievably great, that's exactly what I meant. Is to be able, not necessarily the big things, when the big things, and that's not necessarily the greatness in Avodas Hashem. The greatness of Avodas Hashem is to be able to move from corner to corner, from every nook and cranny in life, and struggle with it and wrestle with the Malach HaVesav. That's the biggest thing in Avodas Hashem. And in the world of truth, that's the most chashuv thing. It's not when everything is easy and big and inspirational. The biggest moments in Avodas Hashem, from the Olam HaEmes's perspective, are those moments when you're struggling with forces that are stopping you from doing what you want, and you epis get out Baruch Hu v'Shemayim, an Amen, a Kriya Shema. That's the biggest thing in Avodas Hashem. So Hashem Shalom, we should be zeicha to have that name of Yisrael, and to be proud of that name, Ki Sarisa, to struggle with the Malach HaVesav. Vetucha will be successful, but the Ikar Inyan is to struggle. That's the simcha of the name of Yisrael. That's the simcha of Chanukah. We should be zeicha to experience that. Begul Hashem v'amitis v'vias kol tzedek meher v'yimeinu amen. Thank you Hashem. Thank you Hashem.